new unit, we're going to be using clay. Raise your hand if you've ever used air dry clay before. Excellent. So air dry clay is just like regular clay, except you don't have to put it into a big oven or a kiln for it to dry or cure. We can just leave it out and it will harden, it will dry, and we will be able to paint it. All right. So let's just quickly go over some of the expectations and rules about clay. We try to keep all the clay on the table. Remember, when clay dries, it turns to, rock, and even a little bit of clay will turn into dust. If it gets on the floor and people step on it, it gets very dusty in here. I'm in here all day. I don't want to breathe that in. You don't want to breathe that in. So if clay gets on the table, off the table, make sure we put it back on the table and we keep all the clay off the floor. If you spill water or get clay on the floor, it's no big deal. Just raise your hand and I will come help you clean it up. We're going to be using a lot of water and also a lot of sharp tools. So during this unit, it's really important that we stay in our seats and we raise our hand and we use our hand signals if we need to get up, go to the bathroom, or get any water or anything. Myself and helpers should be the only people handing out materials. Remember, when it's your turn to get clay, just like we did with acrylic paint, I will call you up by table to come and get your clay. When you get your clay, the first thing you're going to want to do is knead it, just like you would with dough. So everybody has in front of them a little canvas board like this. This is going to be our work surface. So when you get your clay, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to knead it. Just press it into the table a few times. What that does is it gets the air bubbles out of there, and it makes it so that our sculpture stays together once it's dry. That's especially important for regular clay that would go in a kiln, because if there's air bubbles, what happens is the moisture in there, when it gets really hot, it will expand and turn into steam, and it'll make your sculpture explode. Now, we're not using a kiln, we're just using air dry clay, but even still, when it dries, you don't want those pockets of air or moisture in there, because it'll make your sculpture a lot more delicate. We're going to be learning two techniques today. The first one is called coils, and the second is called scoring. Now, coils are going to be important for our first sculpture, but it's just a simple technique to get us started. Scoring, you're going to use all the time. What scoring is what makes clay stick together. So, coils, if you look up here, coils are some of the most ancient techniques of pottery or ceramics. They were used all over the world. Some of the earliest examples are around where modern day Mexico is, but it's an ancient technique. And essentially what we're doing is we're rolling thin coils, almost like worms or long noodles, and we're going to use those as the building blocks for our sculptures. So what I want you to do is, I want you to get your clay, and I want you to take a little piece like this. And what you're going to kind of squeeze it together, make like a nugget. Then what you're going to do is, on your table, you're going to roll it back and forth to make a long noodle. Now, watch how my hands start together, and then as I move them back and forth, they move apart. What that does is it spreads out the clay, so it makes your coil longer. It's going to stretch your clay out. So I want you to start rolling back and forth with your hands together, and then slowly move your hands out. You're going to do that a bunch of times. Watch how I do it. See how my hands start together and then move apart? That's the technique. So you can obviously make coils of different thicknesses. Thinner coils might be easier to work with. Thicker coils might be a little sturdier. But the idea is to make coils like this. Now, if you make a big coil, you could rip it in half. Sort of depends on the sculpture you're going to make. People can use these to make an entire pot, like a coil pot, like you see in the photo there. Or you could use them as decoration, maybe on a flat sculpture or on a more figurative sculpture. Either way, coils are a great technique to sort of get a building block. So I want you to try to make as many coils as you can once you get your clay. We'll take about 5 minutes to make as many coils as you can with the clay that you got. The next part is called scoring. So there's a bunch of tools in there that you've probably seen before on your tables. The tool that we're going to be using today is called a scoring tool. It looks like this. It looks almost like a paintbrush, but it's made of metal. The bristles are made of metal. Everybody go ahead, hold up the scoring tool at your table. Good. So what this does is, we use this to scratch up the clay. Anytime you want clay to stick together, you need to score both surfaces that are going to stick together. So let's say I'm making a mask. and I have my face, but then I make a nose. If I want that nose to stick to the mask, I need to scratch up the back of the nose and scratch up the front of the face and add a little bit of water and then smush them together. What that does is when you scratch it up, and you'll be able to see, what it does is it makes a bunch of grooves and crumbs of clay. And when you add a little bit of water, the water mixes with those little crumbs and it gets in those grooves and it almost forms like a cement or a glue that will help this clay stay together once it's dry. If you don't do that, if you just sort of treat the clay like Play-Doh and you smush it together, it might look good and together when it's wet, but a lot of times when it dries, it's gonna fall right off. So the way that people make coil pots is essentially with their coils, they attach them. So if I have my coils and maybe I make them into rings, like I'm gonna make a pot, if I wanna stack these two rings and make them stick together, I need to scratch up. And don't be afraid to really scratch it up. Remember, this clay is wet, so we can smooth it out after we're done if there's some scratches that we see. And you really want it to be scratched up. And you can't just scratch up one side. Remember, you gotta scratch up all the clay that's gonna be touching. So both surfaces that are gonna be touching. So now I have my two scratched up, scored surfaces. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna get a little bit of water in the bowls on your table. Just get a little bit on your finger. Add a little bit of water. And then you can start to press together your scratched up surfaces. You can smooth them out. Now you can clearly see that there's still two coils here. If you wanted to, you could use one of the other tools, maybe like a sculpting tool or even a pencil or your finger. And what you can do is you can start to smooth these together. Start pressing the clay together. And that way it won't look bumpy like a coil. It'll just look like a smooth surface of these two together. So that way you can make a coil pot that doesn't necessarily look like a coil pot. But remember, coil pots is just one way you could use coils. You could use coils for a lot of different things. They're great building blocks. They're great for adding decoration. If you wanted to add a pattern on the outside of a sculpture, you could make a pattern with coils. It's just one of the many sort of building blocks of a sculpture that you can use. Like this, see? So remember, when your table gets called, you're gonna come up here to the demo table. I'll give everybody your clay. You go back and you knead it a couple times on your canvas board to get the air bubbles out. Then you're going to take little pieces and you're gonna make coils. Remember, you roll it back and forth. You start with your hands together and you slowly move them apart. And that's what spreads out the clay, stretches out your coil. Once you have those coils, after a few minutes, we're gonna practice scoring. So you're gonna be scratching up the surfaces that are gonna stick together, adding a little bit of water with your finger, and then pressing them together. Everybody can try to make like a little coil pot or a little tube or a little sculpture, just for practice. And also remember, I need you to stay in your seats unless I call you to come up. Please use your hand signals. If you need to go to the bathroom, wash your hands, get some tissue, get a pencil, whatever. It's important that we stay in our seats and we keep all the clay on the table. Anybody have any questions? Great. Table 1.